Greetings from IIM Lucknow. I am Ridhima Anand, and on behalf of the Alumni Committee of IIM Lucknow, I welcome everyone to the Netrtv Leadership Talk series with our Alumni Leaders in Spotlight. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome our speaker of the day, Dr. Kumar V. Pratap. Mr. Pratap graduated from IIM Lucknow in 1987. In fact, he was a part of the first batch of this institution. After that, he joined the Government of India. He is currently serving as the Joint Secretary of Union Territories. In the past, he has held several key positions within the government. He has worked with the Prime Minister Office, the Embassy of India in Washington, D.C., the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Urban Development, and the Planning Commission. He went on to get a PhD from the University of Maryland. Over his entire career, a plethora of awards and accolades were bestowed upon him. He also received a letter of appreciation from the Indian Prime Minister for his service. He has lectured at several universities across the globe, including our own, IIM Lucknow. In addition to this, he has written a book on PPPs in infrastructure that was published in 2018. His new book on infrastructure financing in India is expected this year. That's truly an amazing career trajectory. We are lucky to have you here with us, sir. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, before we start, I would like to briefly summarize the flow of our conversation today. First, we would like to know about your experience at IIM Lucknow. We'll further move on to your years of service to the Government of India. We would also touch upon the different initiatives that you led throughout these years. Let's get started. My first question is around your time at IIM Lucknow. We would like to know more about your days at IIML. As you were the past of first batch, it would have been a different experience altogether. What, according to you, have been the key learnings and takeaways from your life at IIM Lucknow?
Yeah, it's about, I think, 36 years ago that I joined IIM Lucknow. It was in April, May 1985, I think, when I got the final confirmation from IIM Lucknow that I've been selected. At that time, there were only 4 IIMs, and IIM Lucknow was the latest one. So it was, I was in Delhi University, so it was quite a thrill because to get into an IIM, it was everybody's dream. I was in the economics area. So, and at that time, we did not have a campus. So we were put up in Aliganj, 5 to 6 students in a rented house, and we had single rooms, but and our classes used to be held in Giri Institute of Development Studies. All these are in Aliganj, I think. We used to cycle to the institute, and I don't know. It was the year 2000 when you got the campus. When did it come up?
Yes, sir, around that time.
Yeah. So, so it was highly unorganized, and we had a wonderful director called Dr. Ishwar Dayal. He looked to start an institute to establish the systems. It's completely different from running an institute. So people who start an institution have to establish the rules, regulations, etc., everything from scratch. So it was extreme, and we had a system builder in Dr. Ishwar Dayal. He took a course for us. Also, he used to teach us organizational behavior. And he was highly accessible. We had a PGP chairman by the name of Professor S.K. Singh. I think we have lost both of them. In fact, it's a great loss to the IIM community because these were truly system builders and started this institute. I think these are very important attributes. A director to be able to teach in a class because that's how he would get to know what the students feel. Other than that, in terms of key learnings from IIM Lucknow, I think the values are the most important. One is the skills, the tools that you would say in project management or in project appraisal, you would have the various tools like net present value or the IRR. But more important than that is the values that you imbibe. Being regular to the class, doing your readings before going to the class so that you can participate. All this was ingrained in me right from the beginning. And these are old world habits, not to appreciate it these days, but I think they're very important. Honesty to oneself is very important. And these are the values that you learn in your formative years. I think IIM Lucknow had a great role in this. And it taught me to be fearless. If I think that something is wrong, I would say so. And in blunt terms, one suffers because of that. But then at the end of the day, you have a nice sleep and you can't suffer too much also because there is appreciation for honesty, both in terms of purpose and in terms of hard work that you put in. So these are the important values that I imbibed at IIM Lucknow. It's been, I'm grateful to the Institute to be able to impart that sort of a knowledge also to its students.
It's great to hear that, sir. IIM Lucknow still follows the tradition where director teaches their students. And your point noted that the discipline and honesty are the values that we should imbibe throughout our life. Thank you, sir. Moving on. Sir, your achievements speak volume about your tenacity throughout the course. You have made a plethora of critical decisions along the way. Could you tell us more about the important periods in your career?
Two of my assignments. One, I joined the government in the year 1992. Early in my career, I got a chance to be selected for the position of Third Secretary for Economic Affairs at the Embassy of India in Washington, D.C. I would have never gone there otherwise. I know what I am. So I was lucky to have been selected. And it was a great learning experience. My job was to help prospective investors from the US to invest in India. So while the large companies have access to this information, they have large research departments, the mid-size and the smaller companies did not have that. And so it was, I helped them get into India, and US continues to be in the first three in terms of inward investments into India. Investments are important for this country, as you would have been taught in economics and even otherwise. So, I was happy to note that I played some small part in it, and in the years 1995 to 99, while I was at the embassy, the amount of foreign direct investment into India from the US doubled. Among the best assignments that I've had is I was selected again. Unlike the usual bureaucratic roles, if you want to take up something different, you're interviewed and you're selected. So I was selected again for this position as Deputy Secretary in the Prime Minister's office. This was in the year 2002. I was there till 2006. And I had the good fortune of working with both Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee as well as Dr. Manmohan Singh, evenly divided, about 2.25 years each. So let me tell you, on the day on which Manmohan Singh joined as Prime Minister, we were all waiting for the Prime Minister to come in. He had just taken oath. He came in about 10 p.m. To the Prime Minister's office, and this was May 22nd, 2004. And Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, everybody was expecting he would win. So it was a great changeover. But when he met us in the main room in the Prime Minister's office, this is just next to the chamber of the Prime Minister, he told us that your job is to give me honest advice. And that's what I would value. There would be no changes which are irregular. Only orderly changes would be there. So it was a change from the BJP regime to the Congress regime. And these two things, I think, speak volumes for the person that Dr. Manmohan Singh is. That any changes would be orderly. So there is nothing personal. We are career bureaucrats. And among in the two things that two contributions that I would say were I led these initiatives was in the Ministry of Coal again, and we were able to manage through two critical reforms. One was electronic auction of coal. Now, the price of coal could be set by administering this price. The government sets its price, and there would be a market clearing price. And there is a huge difference between the administered price and the market clearing price. And the difference used to be pocketed by the middlemen. So on the one hand, we had poorly performing public sector coal companies like Bharat Coking Coal Limited, BCCL, ECL, Eastern Coalfields Limited, which were making losses perpetually. And on the other hand, there were these middlemen who were making money, which should have gone to the government. So I helped this policy initiative of introduction of electronic auction of coal, so that for part of the coal produced by these companies, so that some of this rent which was going to the middlemen would start flowing into the government coffers. So on the one hand, you had improvement in allocative efficiency of coal. It is going to the place where it is most valued. And on the other hand, you had, for the first time, BCCL and ECL turned the corner and they became profitable. That saved jobs. Another initiative that we did was about the competitive auction of coal blocks. It has come up only recently, 2016-17, I think, after the Vinod Rai committee report. But we initiated that. The government used to allocate it, which means that there would be people, there would be companies who would apply for the coal blocks, and the government would decide. Now, as the number of coal blocks to be allocated went down, and as the number of applicants went up, there was, it became a lucky thing, but as you know, that nothing is luck, it's all bribe money. So it was thought that if you introduce competitive bidding of coal blocks, part of this rent would start coming to government. And we initiated this, but was came into fruition much later. But it's the system right now. And I made a significant contribution to both these initiatives. Among the other jobs that I've had, my dream job was being Joint Secretary in Infrastructure Policy and Finance in the Ministry of Finance, because I've specialized in this area. I did my PhD in this area, and I taught a course at the Indian School of Business called Infrastructure and the Private Sector. I created that course. I taught it for 5 years before I got posted here in the Ministry of Finance as Joint Secretary Infrastructure Policy and Finance. And Finance Secretary asked me to pull out, so I couldn't teach after that. So, that was living my dream. You, many of the things that you study, many of the things that you practice, all this was combined in this new post of Joint Secretary, Infrastructure Policy and Finance. And I was associated with a number of initiatives. Again, the values that you imbibe for your training at IIM Lucknow. Let me tell you some of the stories of this post. One was the Hyderabad Metro Rail. Now, this is being implemented by L&T. The government, whenever, this is generally metro rails are provided by the government, metro rail services. But because there's a fiscal resource crunch, the government does not have money, it would like to give it out to the private sector on the basis of certain conditions which are part of the contract that the government signs with the private sector. There is because many of these areas are economically viable, but not financially viable, there is a provision of viability gap funding as a grant from the Government of India on the basis of the contractual conditions, the most critical of which was the user fees, the fares that you can charge. So it was a 12,500 crore project. There was a viability gap funding which was decided on competitive bidding basis of 1,500 crores. This was a grant which was given to the private sector so that you would charge fares which are agreed on in the contract. From day one, this company increased the fares by 70%. I, as JS Infrastructure Policy and Finance, stopped this grant. I was under immense pressure that L&T is a big company, that to let it go. Maybe I lost my job because of that, my dream job, and I've been moved to Ministry of Home Affairs. But these are the things that one would have to grapple with in life. And values, again, to reiterate what I've been saying, they are very important. No matter what the, if you feel in a certain way, if you think that that is the right thing to do, come what may, you should be doing it. You should be doing it because moving over to another job, that's not much of a punishment. You remain a government servant. So these were some of the critical areas that I worked on. Again, public-private partnerships in social infrastructure. We are currently this, we have been very successful in public-private partnerships in infrastructure. We are second in the world, both in terms of PPP projects and the investments that come in. In fact, in the period, in the last decade, 2008 to 17, we got India invested $1.1 trillion US dollars into infrastructure, out of which a third came from the private sector. But much of this has come into economic infrastructure, power sector, for example, or transport airports, for example, Delhi and Mumbai airports. These are PPP airports. So, and there have been a lot of gains. There have been resource increase because of private participation. There has also been efficiency improvements in the quality of services that consumers get. So even if you don't need the resources, but the contribution that comes through private participation and the competition that this generates improves public sector performance also. So in education and health, the government has just come out with a new policy on increased viability gap funding to social infrastructure so that the gains from private participation that we have seen in economic infrastructure can be replicated in social infrastructure. Even water supply, no Indian city has 24/7 water supply. And there are successful examples across the world where water supply can be augmented through private participation. I worked in these areas, and many of these areas are being opened up to private sector. So these are some of the things that I would underline in terms of my career.
It was really amazing to hear about all of your contribution towards the government projects. And thank you so much for leading such great initiatives, be it bringing the investment from the US or starting with the electronic auction of coals or the competitive auction for the coal blocks. And like you mentioned, sir, we will try to imbibe all the great values that IIM Lucknow has to offer, and we'll try to continue with that throughout our career journeys. So my next question pertains to the impact of the ongoing pandemic on the Indian infrastructure. In the pandemic, we noticed that many infrastructure projects were paused. How did this affect the labor market? What changes do we observe in this sector as we try to adapt to the new normal?
Yes, it's true that infrastructure suffered both from the demand and the supply side. For example, there was a lockdown, complete lockdown for many days. Roads, railways, airports, ports, etc. Demand destruction because of the lockdown. And obviously it didn't have an impact. In terms of supply, you had the supply chains which were affected because of the lockdown. The labor force was dislocated. Migrant labor, for example, it was very distressing. And there was an impact on infrastructure, both from the demand and the supply side. And if you see the numbers in terms of April to June 2020, the growth rate went down by about 24%. So, in the third quarter, October to December, I think we have just managed to be even. And so this year, we will be down by about 7 to 8%. That's what RBI says. That's what most of the other projections say. But then, it was truly distressing in terms of the misery that was caused to the migrant labor who do not have any means of sustenance when there is no work, unlike you and me. And that was really distressing. There was a human cost involved. And then obviously the factories which used to employ them could not run, and also because of the lockdown, also because of the shortage of the labor force. It is just getting about normalized now, but still there is a lot of hiccup, and we are hearing about the second wave. So that's another worry area. So the unemployment rates shot up during this period, obviously because there was no production, and it was the female labor force which had a disproportionate impact. So it was not neutral across gender, the impact of the pandemic. But then things are improving. Things are improving, and all the major projections that we have say that a double-digit recovery is expected in the year 21-22. But then look at again. I'd like to give you an example of metro rail project. The Delhi Metro. The Delhi Metro used to be. There's about 3 million passengers use it every day. And when it was under lockdown for 169 days, there was a loss of 10 crores a day. So for the Delhi Metro, because of the pandemic, because of the shutdown, and even now, because of the social distancing norms, while an average bogie, a metro bogie would carry about 300 passengers before the pandemic. Right now, because of the social distancing norms, it carries only 50. So 1/6. That is the amount of supply demand destruction, so to say, because of the problems of supply that has happened. So it is quite a bit, but the government has tried to prioritize infrastructure because it is always realized that whenever there is a crisis, the infrastructure investment should be prioritized and they give you the best returns. And the government has tried to do that.
Thank you, sir, for your response. Like you clearly mentioned that the migrants were the hardest hit. And since the second wave is also anticipated, we can hope that we can apply some learnings and we can correct the mistakes that we did the last year. So it brings to me to the next question. At the time of pandemic, capital budgeting decisions have become more pivotal than ever. And we all know that infrastructure building and maintenance is capital intensive. What are various financing instruments used in infrastructure? Also, how would the ongoing pandemic affect the investment procurement for these projects?
The government has tried to prioritize infrastructure. Uh, India got its first ever national infrastructure pipeline in the year 2020. It was presented to the finance minister in April 2020. I was the member of the task force which prepared the national infrastructure pipeline. So countries like the UK, like Canada, which are in the forefront of private participation in infrastructure, always have this pipeline of projects that they have available for prospective investors. India never had such a thing. So it was thought that this is the way to prioritize infrastructure investment. And they came out with this national infrastructure pipeline. We had over 80 meetings in the Ministry of Finance with 28 infrastructure ministries. Then with state governments, because they implement a lot of infrastructure. Roads, for example, state roads, electricity distribution projects, and the private sector. We had a lot of meetings with the private sectors and the financial institutions. The total numbers in the national infrastructure pipeline is mind-boggling. It is $1.5 trillion, 111 lakh crores of infrastructure investment to be done till the year, till the financial year 24-25. So it is for a 6-year period, 1920 to 24-25. So you would roughly do about $250 billion of infrastructure investment per year. What have we been doing? We have done about $140 billion in 1920 we invested about 10 lakh crores of infrastructure investments from the central government, from the state governments, and from the private sector. So you're roughly doubling this number through the national infrastructure pipeline. And obviously, financing is an issue because these are huge numbers. So what do? One of the ways in which government has tried to address this, and there are various sources. One is the government budgetary support, which comes directly from the budget, which goes to the ministries. Then there is internal and extra budgetary resources of the public sector, which means that companies like NTPC, for example, they have retained earnings, which can be used to finance some of these projects. They can also go to the market to raise money, and then there is private investment. So in the decade of from 2008 to 17, India invested about $1.1 trillion on infrastructure, out of which 37 to 38% came from the private sector. So private sector is very important. Now, in terms of the financial instruments, in terms of strategy, and let me tell you about the strategy. This is, we made a presentation, finance secretary and I had gone to the Prime Minister's office in the year 2018, April 18, 2018. That was when we made the presentation on asset monetization at the Prime Minister's office, where all the secretaries were there, and so were many of these public sector company heads, in which the idea was given that infrastructure projects, the risks associated with infrastructure projects go down tremendously as they go from construction stage to operation stage. Now, why does this risk go down? Because one, your land acquisition has already been done because you are in operation stage. Secondly, environment and forest clearances, for example, very important source of risk for infrastructure projects. They have also been taken care of because your project is operational. Now, once you have operational projects, it is amenable to institutional investment. Okay, debt funding of infrastructure projects is mainly from bank financing right now. Over 50% of debt funding of infrastructure projects, which are mainly implemented on project finance basis, is sourced from banks. And banks are not the best sources of finance for infrastructure because of the asset liability mismatch. The liabilities of banks, the deposits are for a maximum period of say 5 years, the fixed deposits that banks source. And the assets, infrastructure assets have a life of 30 years or more. So you would want to amortize it over the entire life of the project because you want to keep the user charges affordable. So then there is an asset liability mismatch because the money is coming back to you only over a 30-year period while your liabilities mature in 5 years. So this was a major problem in terms of the growth of NPAs in the Indian non-performing assets in Indian banks. And if you see the numbers across sectors, the incidence of NPAs in infrastructure is disproportionate. While overall there is a rate of NPAs is about 10%, for infrastructure projects it's 22%, partly because of this asset liability mismatch. So it was felt that institutional investors like pension funds, like insurance funds and sovereign wealth funds, whose liabilities mature over a longer term, which matches the asset life of infrastructure. So there would be no asset liability mismatch if institutional investment can be put into infrastructure. Now, increasingly, institutional investors are looking at infrastructure, and Government of India created two models to be able to do that. One is the toll operate transfer, which is again for operational projects, mainly for the road sector projects. So once you have a road sector project which is operational, you can give it out to the private sector to be able to toll it, to be able to maintain it, and give you a lump sum right in the beginning. So NHAI, the National Highway Authority of India, has approval of over 1 lakh crore of projects which can be given out to the private sector through the TOT model. They have done 2 successful transactions till now. And in fact, the person who heads NHAI has just created a INVIT, and the person who heads this INVIT is IIM Lucknow alumnus. He was in Macquarie Capital, so he is the one who heads it. Suresh Goyal, I think. He is instrumental in this area. So while NHAI has a number of these projects which can be given out to the private sector through the toll of rate transfer model, they have done only 2 successful transactions till now and raised about 15,000 crore. Now, the first transaction was the most successful, in which the initial value of the transaction on business as usual basis was about 6,200 crores. These were 9 road stretches which were farmed out to the private sector to be for them to be able to toll it for a 30-year period, and then the assets come back to the government, to NHAI. So since these are operational projects, they already have an estimate of how much revenues it would generate, and the value was 6,200 crores. Macquarie, which got this project along with an Indian partner called Ashoka Buildcon, and they bid the winning bidder. They were the winning bidders. They bid 50% higher, so 9,600 crores. Now, why did this happen? One, because of the private sector efficiency. Projects which are implemented by the government, there are lots of leakages. That would be taken care of, and the private sector would be able to do much more efficient project management. And these are the things which would help, which helped Macquarie, and also the lower cost of capital. They had an India fund which they used to fund this acquisition. So one is the toll of rate transfer model. The other is the Infrastructure Investment Trust. Now, SEBI, the Securities Exchange Board of India, came out with the regulations on Infrastructure Investment Trust and the Real Estate Investment Trust, REIT and InvIT, in the year 2014. But it is only about 2016-17 that these initiatives started bearing fruit. And what happens is that the revenue stream of operational projects are transferred to these infrastructure investment trusts, which has contribution from pension insurance funds, as well as high net worth individuals. And the government has liberalized the investment limits so that even retail investors can participate. And we have power transmission InvIT promoted by I forget the name, which was a pioneer in this area. We have a road sector InvIT being done by L&T and also by IRB. Some of these are public InvITs, some which means they can be traded. Some are private InvITs. So pension funds prefer private InvITs, and so the regulations were changed. And CPPIB, the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, is a major investor in InvITs. It is, for example, investing in. It has invested in L&T InfraVIT for the road sector projects. So these, because institutional investors prefer de-risk projects, and since these are operational projects, it was felt that this could be of mutual advantage. The government is looking for broadening this. The National Infrastructure Pipeline talks of 5 lakh crores to be sourced from InvITs through asset monetization, but only 80,000 crore has been done till now, but there is scope for much more. Power Grid and NHAI are creating their own InvITs. Suresh Goyal, an alumnus of IIM Lucknow, heads the NHAI InvIT. And so it is expected that this will be mainstreamed and a lot more money would come in because the government needs the money. We want to invest 111 lakh crores. Again, we are second in the world in terms of infrastructure investment. While developed countries have already built their infrastructure, only about 40% of Indian infrastructure has been built. So all these initiatives will play out. And I was lucky to have played some part in this, in making a difference to the infrastructure history of this country. But then problems remain in terms of user charges. For example, when I was at IIM Lucknow, the fees that we used to pay, and it was 150 rupees for 6 months. 150 rupees for 6 months. And the dining charges were, of course, separate. But this was the tuition fee. So the amount of subsidy that governmental institutions provide is mind-boggling. No, especially in health services, public hospitals, educational institutions, it's only now that IIMs have matched up to ISB, for example, in terms of fees. But it used to be highly subsidized till some years ago. Even in economic infrastructure, there is 70 paise loss per unit of electricity sold in this country, which adds up to 60,000 crore in the power distribution segment. Power distribution is bankrupt in India. So you need to increase user charges. The idea is not to transfer the inefficiencies to the consumers, but you need to increase the user charges to reasonable levels in order to fund some of these infrastructure investment through internal resources, through retained earnings. So user charges would be an important element in funding the national infrastructure pipeline.
Thank you, sir, for your response. I'm sure this information is going to help anyone who is interested in this industry. It was really insightful to know about your vast experience. Sir, like you mentioned that you were the member secretary of the task force that prepared India's first national infrastructure pipeline. Can you let us through the national infrastructure pipeline's progress and how the COVID-19 pandemic affected different projects under NIP?
As I said, the national infrastructure pipeline is a 6-year pipeline of projects which need to be implemented by the central government, the state government, and the private sector. The rough division of responsibilities in the 111 lakh crore worth of projects spread over 6,847 projects. These are all available over the internet, details about this project. So we used to have these meetings with the government ministries, with the state governments and the private sector, and we collated each of these projects, information on each of these projects so that it can be made available to prospective investors. So, and because of the pandemic, and if you divide 111 lakh crore by 6, you would come to about 18 lakh crores per annum. While we are doing about 10 lakh crores, it is nearly double than what we need to do. Because if you don't invest in infrastructure, your growth rate goes down. India prides itself by calling itself as the fastest growing large economy in the world. It is hoped we were at status in 2018-19, but it is hoped that the V-shaped recovery that we are seeing, it is hoped that we would regain that position in the year 21-22. So investing in infrastructure is important, but the numbers that we see makes it, there's a lot of backlog in terms of, so we need to do 18 lakh crores in terms of the national infrastructure pipeline in the year 1920. The pipeline says that we should have invested 14 lakh crores in the year 2021 and 21-22, more than about 21 lakh crore in each of these years. But I suspect while we did 10 lakh crore in 1920, in the year 2021, I suspect it could be near about this number only, mainly because government has prioritized, a lot of money has gone into infrastructure from the government level. But if you see the financing, about 79% of the financing of the national infrastructure pipeline was to come from the government, both the central government and the state government. And there has been a slippage here also because of the, while the government has prioritized, but there is a fiscal resource crunch. The number for the central government fiscal deficit, the revised estimates which the finance minister presented in on 1st of February for 2021 is 9.5% of the GDP. This is unprecedented. India has not seen this number ever. So, so there is a lot of resource crunch. So obviously there would be slippages in implementation of the national infrastructure pipeline. But it was hoped that if the public sector is not able to do that, the private sector would come in. But private sector in these current times is worried. It's worried also. There is a lot of risk that they are faced with, and so conserving cash is what they're aiming at. They are also going slow in their fresh investments. But since the national infrastructure pipeline is a 6-year pipeline, so it is hoped that with the double-digit recovery that India is expecting in 21-22, all these things would work itself out, and we would see a major upsurge in infrastructure investment, and a substantive part of the national infrastructure pipeline would be implemented over these till the financial year 24-25. But it is true that it was adversely impacted. The national infrastructure pipeline was adversely impacted. Why I'm saying that we are on the cusp of an upsurge in infrastructure investment, I'd like to give you some examples. One is that the MHA they did the third bundle of toll operate transfer projects to Cube Highways, a Singapore-based company, in December 2019. Then 6 of the circles in Orissa in electricity distribution were given over to the Tatas again in the year 2020, just around the COVID times. Then Adani Green Energy got the world's largest contract in solar power, valued at $6 billion in June 2020, I think. Another one of these projects, IRB, this is a major road sector company, they were able to do asset monetization of the Mumbai-Pune highway in these COVID times at a value of 8,000 crores. Then in the solar sector, the current tenders are 1.99 rupees per unit of power, per kilowatt hour of power. Now, compare this with the average cost of power in this country, the cost of supply, it's 6 rupees. So when solar power is so cheap, it becomes competitive. And finally, Reliance in India was able to sell just about a third of Geo platform and got 152,000 crores. If you add this up, it is about 2.5 lakh crores. In the very troubled 10 months of the COVID period, then it is spread across sectors. Then this Jewar airport done by the government of UP, again, a greenfield infrastructure project being given over to a foreign investor. Now, you would know that there is a foreign exchange risk involved in infrastructure investment because the infrastructure revenues are generally denominated in local currency. But and there are huge risks, construction risks for a greenfield project. There is Zurich AG, the operator of the Swiss airport, which has been given this contract by the government of UP. So it is spread across sectors, both domestic and mainly foreign investors, which means that they're betting on a stable Indian currency over the concession period of 30 years. Greenfield and brownfield projects, projects at both the central government level and state level, and projects in the most difficult electricity distribution sector. All this means that Indian infrastructure story is still very attractive to the private sector, and investments would come in.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving so much in-depth and insights onto the national infrastructure pipeline and how we can get the most of the investments in the infrastructure projects. It brings us to our last question. As an alumnus of IIM Lucknow, what would you advise the current batch of students who are a witness to an MBA in a pandemic? And what are the key skill sets relevant for the MBA students?
Again, as I said, values are very important and values are long term. Pandemic, this too will pass. We are about a year into the pandemic. And if you see the growth rate in terms of the fertility rate, because of the case fatality rate, the rate of incidence, the positivity rate, all these are drastically down since April to June, March to June of 2020. So it is hoped that we would not be subjected to the second wave. And and things would return to the normal and much more, and India would regain its position as the fastest growing large economy in the world, and it would throw up opportunities all over. So the skills that you get at IIM Lucknow, in terms both of the skills that we require for our jobs, but more importantly, the values that we get there, and the old world charm of honesty and hard work, I think would be very important. And these continue with you throughout your lifetime. So pandemics will come and go, and it shouldn't make much of a difference. But I realize in the short term, it does make a difference, but hopefully we will get over this very soon.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure that we all will follow your advice and we'll try to keep these values with us, be the hard work and the honesty. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and sparing your valuable time to enlighten us with your thoughts. I'm sure this conversation will be fruitful for anyone who wants to learn from your career journey. Thanks again for giving us in-depth insights. We hope to connect with you again soon. I extend my gratitude to everyone present here with us today. I wish everyone good health and happiness. Don't forget to wear a mask and follow government norms on COVID-19. Have a great day.